Oh my God, this is getting heated. So Derrick James has a lawsuit. He did file a lawsuit against Errol Spence. I want to say this first. Like I told you guys, since this community is the community that broke the story to begin with of Errol Spence and Derrick James splitting, I think it's our responsibility to follow the story all the way to completion. And we have the lawsuit, the court filings, and it's public record. It's public record.
It's public record.
And listen, it's going to court. As of right now, they have not settled this outside of court. So let's read what we know. I'm not going to read everything about this, but to give you guys the gist. Okay, so Derrick James is the plaintiff with Errol Spence as the defendant. Once again, this is all public record. I'm not going to expose any fragile information here, but just the basics. So here's what it says as far as the factual background. It says the dispute arises out of oral and or written contracts between Mr. James and Mr. Spence. Mr. James, who trains professional boxers, agreed to provide training services to Mr. Spence, who is a professional boxer, in preparation for and during Mr. Spence's professional boxing matches. In exchange, Mr. Spence, who was once known as the Truth, agreed to pay Mr. James 10% of guaranteed fight purse for the work, labor, and or services by Mr. James. Don't forget, guaranteed fight purse. But it says, it continues, it is standard in the boxing industry that a fighter's purse includes a agreed amount for the actual prize fight that is typically paid by the promoter and a percentage of the pay-per-view revenue when the fighter's skill allows him to demand and negotiate such. The pay-per-view received from the pay-per-view revenue, which is typically paid by a pay-per-view provider, is commonly referred to as getting paid on the back end, because the revenue is calculated after the fight and is based on previous agreed upon percentage that the two fighters negotiate before the fight. It is also standard that as a professional, fighter's skill set continues to develop and the wins continue to accumulate, the difficulty of his opponents increases, his notoriety increases, and ability to fight for world championships increases, and the size of his fan base increases, the fighter becomes more marketable. It also states that as all of the foregoing increase, the size of the fighter's purse increases, and he is eventually able to negotiate a percentage of the television and or pay-per-view revenue. Mr. James trained Mr. Spence when his agreed purses range from approximately $2,500 to his largest guaranteed purse of $25 million. This lawsuit was filed because Mr. James discovered Mr. Spence's breach of contract, fraudulent business practices, and misrepresentations after Mr. Spence received $25 million guaranteed fight purse. So what this is saying is that Derrick James is saying, listen, we agreed on 10%, and 10% he feels, or he states as the industry standard, being that of the guaranteed purse on top of the money received on the back end. Now let's see what Errol Spence has to say real quick. Now, Errol Spence, on the other hand, he seeks a declaration of rights and obligations of the parties under an oral agreement between Spence and James, which governed their boxing training relationship. Spence is a professional boxer and James is a longtime trainer. Now, Spence has consistently paid James for his training services under their oral agreement. Now, oral agreement. Now, in this one, he didn't say oral and or written. It says oral agreement of 10% of Spence's fight purse. meaning the money Spence was to and did receive under a promoter contract for participating in the boxing contest. Their understanding is underscored by a course of performance of payment by Spence to James for training services covering 29 professional fights spread over 11-year time period. For each of these 29 fights, Spence paid James 10% of money that Spence received under the promoter contract for participating in the respective boxing contests, with Spence paying James a bonus for some, but not all, of the fights to emphasize the value that Spence placed on their relationship. Spence and James' oral agreement does not provide that James would be paid 10% of Spence's total fight revenue, such that Spence is not required to pay James 10% of the revenue tied to fight guaranteed from the pay-per-view or otherwise. Now, there you go. When they both agreed orally that Spence will be paying Derrick James the standard of 10% to his trainer, it was under Spence. Spence felt that that meant 10% of his guaranteed purse, not 10% guaranteed plus the back end, where Derrick James was under the perception that it meant everything. Now, here Errol Spence is saying that he always paid him just 10% and sometimes giving him a bonus, but that wasn't consistent, meaning that's not what should be expected. But we have a bomb here, because in Derrick James's petition, he has evidence of Errol Spence in a text saying that he's going to pay all of the money. Here's the evidence, and here's the text. Now, they have this included. It says, "Good morning, EJ. It is easier to wave the money to my account." And he posts this account, which is, thank goodness, blotted out. Now, Errol Spence said, "What number is this?" Derrick says, "This is my bank account number." Errol Spence says, "Cool. What's the number?" $2,150,000 since I've already paid you $350,000. So he acknowledges it. Derrick James says yes. EJ said, "It'll be next week. Don't have it liquid." And Derrick said, "Okay." So with this evidence provided by Derrick James in text, it looks like Errol Spence acknowledged the fact, maybe I owe you $2.1 million approximately. Now, this is what we know is public record. You guys can dive deeper if you want to search it. I don't have much an opinion on it. I just wanted to give you guys the information. But I want to say this. It seems, all right, it looks like Errol Spence did acknowledge maybe Derrick James deserves more than just 10% of the guaranteed, according to that text message. But does that mean that he's legally obligated to? So let me know how you feel in the comments below. What do you think about all this? We will cover the story until conclusion. I thought it would be no fair to tell you guys what happened and not follow through now that I jumped in this pot, which I usually don't, but I jumped in this pot, and now I have raised the expectation from you guys. What would be great for me is for them to come to a resolution. Their agreement was a handshake before. They're brothers, and I hope this just doesn't really turn into something extremely ugly. Derrick James, though, is doing a phenomenal job with Ryan Garcia after a big win. He has a fight with Frank Martin versus Gervonta Tank Davis. Hopefully this is a lesson to all the fighters and the trainers alike, regardless of how long your relationship has been and